From under the Golden Dome in Charleston, this is the West Virginia Capitol Report.
Well, hello everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of the Capitol Report. I'm Bill Laird along with co-host Dave Perry, and we have a very interesting program lined out for you today. As we all know, corrections is an important part of public safety in the great state of West Virginia, and the West Virginia Division of Corrections and Rehabilitation Services, a state agency charged with the custodial responsibility of the safekeeping and monitoring of inmates committed to the jurisdiction and control of the Division of Corrections. And again, we have with us today the Superintendent of the Charleston Correctional Center and Jail, Mr. Jeff Stinnett, who serves as the superintendent of this institution. And Jeff, welcome to the Capitol Report Show.
Thanks for having me, sir.
You bet. And again, you know, certainly work release is a pretty familiar concept to a lot of people in the state. There's been I think a work release center in the city of Charleston since 1972, but this particular facility fairly recently opened. And if you could just tell our viewers a little bit about, you know, the facility here, what this model is and where it is relative to all the other institutions operated by the Division of Corrections and Rehabilitation.
Sure. Like you said, we started a work release program in 1972 over in downtown Charleston. It moved to Brook Street in 1983, expanded a little bit, had about 60 men. And we opened this facility in 2015, and we have approximately 134 offenders in the program.
Wow, and as I understand, it's a little bit of a dual purpose. You have two types of programs that are kind of operated here simultaneously. If maybe you could tell us a little bit about what programs you have established here.
Sure. We have, as I mentioned, we have a work release component of the facility, and we have 104 offenders in that program, 80 male, 24 females in the work release program, and then we have a 32-bed drug treatment unit. It's called a residential substance abuse therapist unit that all the other work releases operate the same type facilities. Folks in the RSAT unit, the drug unit, they don't have the work release privilege. All they do is program, have classes, drug treatment and prevention classes all day long, with the ultimate goal of completing the program and moving up to the work release program.
When you talk about classes, Jeff, what types of opportunities or classes or curriculum or academic completions do the persons participating in that are either in the work release or the RSAT?
Well, the RSAT has specific drug programs. Just basically, there's a lot of it focuses on just life skills, coping with problems, teach them how to cope. Rather than turn to drugs, they learn how to cope with problems. We also have some nonprofit agencies that come in and do basic just job interviewing, bookkeeping or check keeping, stuff that a lot of folks like you and I probably had growing up that they didn't have, and basic manners, resume writing, how to do a job interview. We also have folks come in to do AA, NA classes or programs. We're just starting recovery coaches, which are former addicts that receive training that come in and help folks deal with their addictions and their desire to if they're having some problems that they're wanting to reuse or use again. They help them deal with those kind of issues.
Is there anything that deals with curriculum in terms of high school diplomas?
We do. We have a lady with the Department of Education. She's here. She's not quite full-time, but you'd think she's full-time, the number of hours she's here. But she helps folks get their, what they used to call the GED, and their pre-testing and all that's involved. So, and we've had a few people that have got that while they're here, got their high school equivalency.
Okay.
She also has some other classes that she teaches. It's the name of it escapes me, but it's basically a hospitality that the state puts out for the people that want to work in the hospitality industry, like with tourism.
Tourism.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Jeff, maybe again for the benefit of our viewers, kind of putting work release in the overall system of the Department of Corrections. You know, starting with somebody commits a crime, you know, if they're in lieu of bond, those sorts of things. That's where the regional jails come in, and again, short-term misdemeanor convictions, those types of things. But when somebody's you know, remanded to the custody of the Commissioner of the Department of Corrections, you know, I assume they go through a diagnostic and classification process, then sent to one of the adult correction facilities in the state. And you know, that's kind of the intake process of going through the door and into the system. Work release to me has always sort of been that point of departure, recognizing that so many people that go into our correctional facilities ultimately come out and regain their status as citizens living in the communities. So, you know, if you could talk to us a little bit about, you know, the importance of trying to prepare and help people who get ready to exit from the Department of Corrections and regain entry into the community. How does work release, your all's mission of trying to encourage and facilitate re-entry, I suppose, is what the literature calls it now. You know, what is it that you all, you know, try to do and accomplish in preparing people to re-enter our communities?
Well, like you said, there's a diagnostic and classification portion when you first enter prison. They determine what level you will be housed in, what type of facility. There's 5 work release offenders have to be at level 1 or 2, so they're in the lower risk scale. They work their way. They have to spend certain time at higher level facilities while they work their way down, and if their behavior is they have no behavior issues, they're eligible for work release. And there's a couple criteria for that. They have to be within 2 years of their release, either discharge or parole. Like I said, no violent crimes in their background, no behavior problems. Then once they make their way to the work release program, we assign them a case manager, and with the case manager, he gives them a set of goals. We call them goals. And out of those, they have to get their IDs. They have to start working on a home plan to see where they want to go. And a lot of them, like we talked about earlier, they've burned a lot of bridges in their past, so they may have to get their own apartment. And for a lot of our people, that's the first time they've had to do anything on their own. So, and that's what the program's designed for, is those folks, because they all have to work while they're here, and so they start saving their money. They start paying any old court costs, victims restitution, DMV fines, anything that's going to impede their reentry back into to the community. And so once they do that, they feel all these goals, and it just gets them closer. So when they do get up for parole, of course, that's going to help them with the parole board. And I've seen a lot of folks leave here with, oh goodness, $8,000, $10,000, $12,000 or more if they put their mind to it.
Yeah.
Speaking of that $8,000 to $10,000 in work release, basically with work release, we're just saying that they are housed here. Mm-hmm. They go out into the community and they have jobs or an employment, and then they come back into the facility. Correct?
That's correct.
So the $8,000 to $10,000. What would be the average stay of those persons in the facility here?
Last time I checked, it was average stay was about 6 months. So of course you probably wouldn't be able to get $10,000 in 6 months, but for the long-term residents, they've done that. But typically they'll come in, they'll get a job, especially if they're staying in the local area, and I've seen a lot of them keep those jobs when they leave, and maintain that same employment when they leave, and they've paid all their bills, and it sets them up for a pretty good opportunity to not reoffend again. That's the goal, is to get them in a place where they don't have to resort to what got them here in the first place. And hopefully they've learned a few life skills along the way, how to treat other people. And that's a big thing. A lot of these folks, when they come here, they're here because their social skills are lacking, maybe. And so part of the program is to try to model good behavior, so they know how to treat their fellow man, if you will.
along with that income and so forth. Of course, taxpayers are concerned. They're paying taxes to house these people. Do these workers pay taxes?
They do. They pay the same taxes you and I if they're working for a private employer, which most of them do. We have a lot of employers in the community in the Charleston area. Like I said, we've been here since '72, so we've built a lot of relationships over the years. We've got a lot of long-term employers. We had them for 20 years or more. But they do pay taxes. If they owe child support's paid, just like you and I, if we would owe child support. They also pay rent to the facility while they're here. And part of that rent helps defray some of their costs. And one of the costs is every inmate that's on work release is on a GPS tracker or an ankle bracelet. So I know that makes a lot of people in the community feel a little better as well, because we know where they're at 24/7.
That's the first time I've heard that, because I know when the senator and I served on the committee, that wasn't part of the program. So that's new.
That's probably been around maybe 4 to 5 years. It's when we came into the building, we started that program. And we initially started with just a few. We liked the program so well, we just made it to 100% of the population.
Jeff, again, looking at reentry as a process, there's some stumbling blocks that are out there that maybe the average citizen wouldn't. Certain things I think we tend to take for granted, such as identification. A lot of these folks I suspect have suspended or revoked operators' licenses. To actually get non-operators ID, to be able to, I don't think you can open a checking or savings account in the community without having proper identification. Housing is always, can be an issue. Those types of stumbling blocks, and I'm sure when they get to the point of seeing the parole board wants to satisfy that enough of those reentry pieces are in place where somebody has a reasonable shot of going back in a community and assuming a life that's going to be somewhat law-abiding. Are some of your programs here intended to address those stumbling blocks? Something as basic as an identification card. Do you all try to make sure that some of those boxes are checked as part of the program effort here at the work release?
We do. I mentioned the goals. That's tied into when you're an inmate at the work release, you're eligible for 2 2-hour passes per week with good behavior. And also once you're here for 30 days, you can start taking home furloughs to your family to reacclimate back to the community and your family. And once you're here for 90 days, you can literally go home every week. But in order to do that, you have to fulfill some of these goals. And one of the goals, the first goal, is to start working on your ID. And as you mentioned, you may have a bunch of DMV fines that are preventing you from getting a valid driver's license or ID. So that was one of the first things we start doing, is taking money and putting it towards your fine so you can get that ID, get your Social Security card again. Any license, we've had some people with a license that they may need to re-qualify for, so we help them with that. So yeah, there's some things of that nature that we help them. And again, it's tied into that whole furlough program. If you're not doing, it doesn't happen a lot, but you'll get the individual that for one reason or another decides they don't want to do that, or just maybe playing around. Right. So that usually is a good motive to.
Mm-hmm. And again, you mentioned that case management is, I guess, the process that you use here, and so do the case managers work with the residents for purposes of checking those boxes and trying to encourage them to fulfill those types of
yes,
things?
They do. They give them a sheet that they have to take to the various other. I have a jobs employment coordinator that she's the one that helps them find a job or deals with employers on it, and then she has to sign off on that sheet in order then again to get their furloughs or passes. So she has to sign off on it. I have a deputy warden. There's a few things she has to sign off on. A unit manager, there's things that he needs to sign off on. So it's an accountability process that tries to get them to understand the way that the real world operates.
Absolutely. Well, Again, we're going to need to take a quick break, and if you'd be kind enough to stay with us, we have several other questions to ask
Sure.
you. But
Absolutely.
again, we're talking today with the Superintendent of the Charleston Correctional Center and Jail, Mr. Superintendent Jeff Stinnett, joining us here today on the Capitol Report. We're going to go ahead and take a break and be right back, so stay with us, everybody.
Stay tuned. The West Virginia Capitol Report will be right back. The West Virginia Capitol Report is brought to you by the AFL-CIO of West Virginia, Cucumber & Company, online at cucumberandcompany.com, and Mark Hunt & Associates, toll free at 800-554-1280. From under the Golden Dome in Charleston, this is the West Virginia Capitol Report.
Welcome back to the Capitol Report as we continue our discussion with Superintendent Jeff Stinnett with the Charleston Correctional Center and Jail about work release and other parts of the mission of the Division of Corrections. And David, you have a question?
Jeff, when we talk about work release across the state of West Virginia, how many centers are there?
Well, there's the primary centers are Charleston, Beckley, Parkersburg, and then Ohio County Correctional Center. They've got an 8-person work release component.
And at any one time in those centers, how many potential persons would they service?
Well, right now there's 318 offenders on work release in the work release programs throughout those 4 facilities.
Wow, that's and you could probably use a few more beds,
Right.
I would think, in terms of that capability. Well, Mr. Superintendent, again, the work release part of it, again, is a concept that's been around for quite some time, but you know, it's well known by all citizens across West Virginia. We have a very serious substance abuse and addiction problem in our communities that is very closely tied to the types of crimes we're seeing in various jurisdictions and everything. So again, one of the important components, I guess, in the establishment of this facility was to add what's referred to as an RSET unit, or a residential substance abuse therapy component that's really intended to attack that serious public health issue. If you could just tell us in a little more detail about your RSAT unit here at the Charleston Correctional Center and Jail.
Yep. We have a 32-bed female therapy unit, and it's been here, it started in August of 2015 at this facility. They've got a male unit at Beckley and another male unit at Parkersburg. And again, part of that, they're eligible for that program 2.5 years before their release. So the ultimate goal was completing the program and working into a work release program at some point. Before they can do that, they go through this program, and it's kind of a family-based unit. You have meetings. They have mentors and elders that again, it teaches them life skills, the way they live. It's please, thank you, you're welcome, and accountability. Again, if somebody does something wrong, they're called to task on it by their peers. And if you know anything about prison, that's kind of a foreign thing, because that probably started a fight in a lot of facilities. But it's encouraged in this unit, and they get them together if there's an issue, and they have to talk it out, and it teaches them to be respectful and courteous to their fellow civilian or citizen. And in addition to that, they're also taking classes all day, and there's just different, most of it is drug prevention, again, the tools to learn how to deal with their problems so they won't turn to drugs. There's a lot of, again, you have folks coming in from the outside with a lot of ministries that do programs we talked a little bit about earlier. There's some programs with the females. There's a Hannah's Gift program. I think it's Callous Ministries. It's part of that. They bring them in, and it seems like that's helped a lot with some of the girls, give them another tool to help them deal with problems. And the females, they have a lot of issues that maybe the guys don't. You could probably argue that, but a lot of them, you know, they're typically the caregiver of their children, so they're also missing their children, and they deal with that. I hear that a lot from them. So you know, you've got all that going on, so they address some of those issues as well.
And I would imagine, you know, probably there's a pretty close connection with their underlying addiction problem and ultimately why they came into corrections. I mean, that's probably the causal factor in their criminal behavior.
Sure.
So the ability to address that. What about accountability? At the end of the day, you know, I think there's a tendency sometimes to blame everybody else. Does this provide them with perhaps an opportunity to, you know, to be self-reflective and say, hey, you know, the buck stops here and I have some accountability?
That's
for my
exactly what it
actions?
does. I was down on the unit the other day just walking through the building and just happened to walk into one where they were giving this girl a pretty rough time, something she had done, and they were holding her to task on it, and she fessed up to it. It wasn't a big deal, but it was big enough that they pulled her in the room, and the whole group were going at her on it, and it wasn't it was confrontational, but it wasn't a violent type thing. They were just talking back and forth, but she admitted that, you know, it was all her. She didn't try to put it on anybody else, and that's kind of what that program does. It teaches them to be accountable for their own actions, not blame others.
Right. And I guess, you know, you have a custodial responsibility. I mean, obviously these people go out and work, as David said, but they come back in the evening. I assume you can drug test them, ensure that you're meeting your custodial responsibility in addition to the treatment part of it. But as far as your staffing goes, do you have you know, correctional officers in the conventional sense of the word, as far as custody and control versus your treatment staff? How are you staffed here?
Yeah, this is a correctional facility. It's our offenders. They are state sentenced inmates, and they're still serving their sentences, so they are still state incarcerated inmates, and held up to the same standards as an inmate at Mount Olive would be. And we, as far as substance abuse testing, we do 100% drug testing monthly on every inmate. And then we also do random tests if we would suspect somebody being under the influence. They're randomly tested. Same with the RSET group. We also, as far as accountability you're talking about, the work release inmates, they go to work every day, of course, like we talked about, but they also pay rent to stay here, and that helps defray some of their housing costs. They pay rent, taxes again, like we talked about, they come out, all their other fees that come out. So they're tasked with a lot. They've got a lot of bills while they're here. Right. But again, I've seen a lot of them that manage their money well, that have learned some money management skills that can get out of here with a pretty nice little start for their release,
Right.
which is the ultimate goal.
I know that recidivism always becomes a discussion. How does this affect recidivism?
Well, I'd like to tell you the recidivism is a lot higher than, or a lot lower than the other facilities, but it's right around 25%. Now, I'll toot my own horn here. At Charleston, the guy checked, and we had about a 16% rate. Last time, I think it was in 2015.
That's outstanding.
But it averages out to about 25% overall.
And the chaplain we talked with earlier talked about, I think he called it moral rehab.
Yes, sir.
What types of things constitute a moral rehab program?
Well, it was patterned after Angola prison. Warden Kane down there, he started a Bible college. And I'm not an expert on it, but from what I understand, his whole goal was to get folks to start following not necessarily religious, any kind of religious thing, but just treat each other better and just get put a moral compass in folks, so they kind of, and so they brought the Bible college in, and he's had great success. And we started probably a few years back with the same program, and they've started at the big prisons. I think Appalachian Bible College came in. I think they teach at Mount Olive. And with the goal again is, as you get graduates, they start spreading throughout the agency, and hopefully that whole idea will spread through the division.
I know Bill was part of that investigation, or looking at that when he was on the oversight committee, Bill.
Again, it's great to hear that those kinds of concepts are taking hold in West Virginia. And Jeff, again, for folks that have kind of watched corrections for a number of years, in more recent years, I'm talking the current administration, some really outstanding progress has been made in addressing some long-standing chronic problems, long overdue pay increases for correctional personnel who have to get up every day, put on the uniform, and go out and keep us safe in the communities in which we live. And I think, you know, maybe that's starting to turn the corner a little bit, where average citizens can say, hey, I'm looking for meaningful work opportunities. The Division of Corrections, I think, is becoming one of those places that people need to investigate those career opportunities. Is your staffing here? Are you able to recruit and retain qualified and capable people, or is that still a struggle to try to keep staff, you know, up to full complement?
No, I've seen a big difference since we've got the pay raises. We have no problem with retaining good people now. And I used to go to job fairs, and I'd be beside different agencies, our state and then federal agencies, and you just couldn't compete.
The West Virginia Capital Report is brought to you by the AFL-CIO of West Virginia, Cucumber and Company, online at cucumberandcompany.com, and Mark Hunt and Associates, toll free at 800-554-1280.
But again, real pleased to be joined today by Superintendent Jeff Stinnett, the Charleston Correctional Center and Jail here, joining us today on the Capital Report. So again, to our viewers, we'd like to thank you all for tuning us in each week on the West Virginia Capital Report. On behalf of co-host Dave Perry, I'm Bill Laird. Again, thanks for tuning us in. Have a good week, and goodbye, everybody.